Hey folks, Rex Bear here with Leak Project. Tonight's guest is Gill Broussard. He is a researcher, astronomer, lecturer, and philosopher, and considered by many a key figure and go-to source on information in regards to Nibiru, the infamous Planet X, or what Mr. Broussard has keyed, Planet 7X. Earlier today, when I researched Planet X, I typed into Google Planet X discovered, and over 2,330,000 results showed up. The first page listed 12 separate articles by mainstream sources, and I'm going to name a few right now. CNN, new planet may have been discovered, researchers say. Science Magazine, astronomers say a Neptune-sized planet lurks beyond Pluto. Then on Caltech's website, caltech.edu, Caltech researchers find evidence of a real ninth planet. Even the skepticsguide.org says astronomers confident that Planet X has been found. Holy crap. National Geographic, scientists find evidence for ninth planet in solar system. Wired magazine, this isn't the first time astronomers have found Planet 9. Even NASA's own news website in 2005 claims astronomers found the infamous Planet X. Now you can find out more about Gill and Planet 7X at planet7x.net, youtube.com/user/planet7x. Also, there's a buffet of information available via DVD. Mr. Broussard has teamed up with independent production company 5 Talent Entertainment and executive producers Rain Mercury and Carolyn Carpenter, bringing you Planet 7X, The Destroyer. Mr. Broussard actually had dinner reservations, and he canceled those reservations so he could come on here with us at the Leak Project, because this information is so important, and really appreciate that, Gill. If you would please give our audience just a brief description about yourself, and then we'll jump into the most current information on Planet X.
Well, I'm an amateur astronomer. I made a living in the oil and gas industry as a graphic designer and engineer tech, and that was designing mostly offshore structures and stuff, and that gave me the background for the math and the engineering tools that we needed to move on and challenge the biblical accounts as well as some of these astronomy accounts, and that's pretty much it.
Now, there's a lot of astronomers out there that are amateurs, I guess you could call them, that have kind of like mysteriously died, right?
Well, there's some professionals that mysteriously died. We've had gondolas, that was transporting the a group of 8 to 12 astronomers to their observatory, and the cable snaps. If you know anything about the maintenance on these type of cable cars, that's extremely rare, because the maintenance is the cable is one of the main things that's scrutinized heavily, and they've had other ones where they've died mysteriously. So yeah, there are some that's questionable whether or not they died of natural or unnatural causes. So,
also there's been a lot of holistic doctors and alternative healers that have mysteriously died last year, 2015, because we're just getting into 2016 here. So it's interesting. I like to use the term heart attacked or suicided. It's very frightening when you get into some of these subjects and topics that the powers that be don't want you to get into. Do you think that these astronomers were onto something?
Uh, it's possible, or their studies would have crossed over into it, and they couldn't allow that, whichever. It's hard to tell because we don't have their data, you know.
Right.
But we do have some of the data from Robert Harrington, which was one of the first ones to die sort of mysteriously. Um, he was sent to Australia. Now he worked for the Office of Naval Research. Anytime you work for the the Navy Department, they give you a full physical. It is required for you to have a full physical before going overseas. And he died before even coming back from throat cancer. That's quite mysterious. They should have called that at, in his physical. And he was the one that wrote about this 10th planet at the time, and gave some of its general locations on where to look, and was the spearhead on where to send the Pioneer and the Voyager probes. And then the sensors would take over, determining its course on where to go in the universe, because the sensors would pick up unknown magnetic fields, and that's what guided the Pioneer and Voyager probes. And the data that I'm about to show you also, we have two studies pertaining to the Chinese, Korean, and Japanese ancient astronomy records, which correlate. We got two independent astronomy in modern times that the orbits of comets are warped. And we have 14 biblical events with 5 secular events that we're able to document. And all this data, and also along with the NASA probes, all this data is pointing to one constellation, Sagittarius, which is actually south of the universe. It's south of the universe is not polar south. That's called Nadar in astronomy, and polar north is called the zenith. The south of the universe is where Sagittarius is. So there's a lot of people claiming to know where this object is, and they're looking polar south, and they're even reading scientific articles where they say, okay, they calculated, like Dr. Robert Harrington saying that it's coming, from the south X amount of degrees, and they're looking in the wrong direction because they don't know enough astronomy even to know where the solar south is. So we have all these studies that are correlating in the same area space, and the Chinese, Korean, and Japanese gave us enough data to plot a segment of their course. And that's what turned me from a hardened skeptic about this planet into to the realization that we do have an object, a large object, because they documented it for 26 months. They didn't have a telescope, so that's by eye, visual. They documented for 26 months, 13 months coming in, 13 months leaving. That can only be a very large object to be able to capture that much light for your naked eye to see that for that period of time. And that was in 1054. It was mislabeled as a supernova. Supernova happened 2-3 months earlier. This object moved through multiple constellations. Supernovas are stationary. It can't be a supernova. What they witnessed for 26 months. And so when I went back and I looked at the data, and I said, they gave us enough data, I think I'll make an attempt to plot it. And come to find out, it gave me a perfect segment of a course. And when I mirrored it over, it gave me a span between the entry and exit, which are both on Earth's planetary plane. It crosses Earth's path, in other words, with a distance between the two, entry and exit, of about 150 to 152 and 1/8 day separation. Well, that rang a bell to the biblical records, like in Noah's flood. Remember, 150 days
Oh, yeah.
between the events. Well, it also rings a bell in Revelation. Seal 6 and 7 are two meteor showers, and it says they wish death for 5 months. 5 months is 150 to 152 days. So we have correlating data here with science and biblical, and where NASA claimed to be looking for the planet. This is where they sent the probes. So what are the odds of that when there are 88 constellations that you can view from Earth, and it all hits one constellation, but does not randomly in the constellation, but on the ecliptic? That's a line that goes across Sagittarius. This object has to be on the ecliptic for Earth to experience two meteor showers as described in the biblical records throughout.
You know,
So,
I'm even looking at a article that came out with NASA Science News, actually. I'm looking at it right now. It came out in 2005, and it says 10th planet discovered. This is July 29th. Just Google it, ladies and gentlemen. It's right there. So, and an article in 1980 that came out talking about Planet X discovered, and Wired came out with an article that said Planet X discovered. This isn't the first time. So if you do some research, they've actually been talking about Planet X since the 1950s. And it seems like, you know, and this is just in the modern times, and what you're talking about, biblical times, and different societies from around the globe are correlating this data. So you've been able to put together some charts that kind of show it's heading close towards us, right? And we're in for a hell of a ride.
right. One of the things remember, I started off as a skeptic, and I was looking for data, hard data, not random, pie in the sky, fictional data that someone would call data. You know what I'm saying? I was looking for data, something that you could plot, something that gave me position, time of day, city, and the circumstances under that time, like whether there was earthquakes, strange eclipses. See, one of the common hallmarks when you're reading the biblical accounts that brings this to light is when you read about a double eclipse, when the sun and moon are both in an eclipse mode at the same time. That's impossible unless you're dealing with a third object, because it takes the moon to eclipse the sun. Like during Yeshua's sacrifice, it says that there was an eclipse for 3 hours, but that's Passover. That's a full moon. That's the wrong type of moon to have a solar eclipse. It takes a new moon to make a solar eclipse, and the moon can only give you 7.3 minutes of an eclipse. And the text says the whole earth was darkened, as well as secular text that says the whole earth was darkened. Well, the moon doesn't darken this entire earth. There's a small dot of a shadow that moves as earth is rotating, and it can only give you in that area 7.3 minutes of darkness. So we're looking at a substantially larger object, and according to the Chinese model, when I overlay it to the biblical records and other ways of calculating the size, we're looking at an object of roughly around 6 to 7.5 times the diameter of Earth. And that gives us a 3-hour eclipse of the sun, at the same time eclipsing the moon, as the text says multiple times in multiple stories in the Bible. And this gives you on certain circumstances a 7-year drought, 3.5-year drought coming in, 3.5-year drought as it leaves. It also associates with floods, lightning bolts up to 30 miles across, tidal waves, the 3 days of darkness during the Exodus. Many of these accounts we can correlate to an actual model that works. Now, keep in mind that there's two camps of thought in the science community at the moment. The astronomy group believes that the universe is ruled by gravity, but the physicists have come up with their own model. They say the universe is electromagnetic in nature. and that the vacuum in space is not a true vacuum, that it's filled like a lake of plasma, which is the fourth state of matter. Remember how astronomers say, well, there's 96% of all matter is missing. So they had to create dark energy and dark matter. Well, the physicist says there's no missing matter. It's in the form of plasma that's clear, and that the vacuum of space is not a true vacuum. Well, that came to a interesting challenge just recently when comet Siding Springs passed near Mars. The astronomers were watching it, and the physicists made a prediction that it was passing close enough where you should see a electrical discharge as the tail of this comet passed over Mars. Well, NASA was watching this, and then just remember they have a delay in the feed of about 7 or 8 seconds. Well, guess what? NASA pulled away from a close-up view and gave you a very far view where you couldn't see it happening. But an amateur astronomer from Spain or Portugal went to the Canary Islands, went to the top of a mountain there. I have his name written somewhere. I can give it to you. And he filmed the event, and we have it. Mars lit up like a Christmas tree, like an EMP event. When that tail crossed, lightning jumped, and the whole atmosphere of Mars lit up like a light bulb. Well, guess what? Now that begins to match with the biblical accounts. Remember Joshua's long day, where the day he had an extra 12 hours of light, and the sun and the moon stood still? Well, only in the plasma model, as this thing's approaching, Earth is, remember, the tail point's opposite of the sun. And as Earth is entering into the tail slowly, it starts to stop the energy from the sun that goes into our north and south pole, which is also plasma. And that causes us to slow down in a rotation between 4.5 to 5.5% compounded hourly. And what you get within 24 to 28 hours is a complete stop without mile-high tidal waves. And that gives you extra 12 hours of daylight on one half of the globe. The other half of the globe gets 12 extra hours of darkness. This can only be reproduced in an actual model on a plasma universe type scenario. 15 years ago, if we would have tried these calculations using a gravity model, we'd fail. But when we look at the new physics and apply what we've learned from the Chinese on this orbital path, we overlay this orbital path with the same, and we find we create an exact model that mimics these biblical stories.
And you've put some of these models together, haven't you?
All of them. Yes.
It'd be great if you
14 of them.
It'd be great if you could show those to us and our listeners. That'd be fantastic.
All right. Let me share my screen.
And while you're pulling that up, I'm just thinking that the tidal waves you were telling us are going to get pretty extreme, right? I mean, they could be hundreds of feet high when this thing gets close.
Oh, yes. You see, I've documented that Earth is tilted 26 to 28 degrees 3 to 4 times in its past. That we have it documented. 4 of those cases are in the biblical records. And it takes it starts to affect Earth about 6 hours before it crosses Earth path. Well, 26 to 28 degrees on Earth's surface is roughly 1,800 miles, and it takes 6 hours to affect it, and 6 hours as it's leaving, where it starts to straighten out again. So if you do the math, 6 hours into 1,800 miles, you're looking at 300-mile-an-hour winds on open water, on on hilly terrain on the ground, that would be cut down maybe to 150 with maybe 200-mile-an-hour gust. But if you ever been in a hurricane at 150, you realize that trees don't stay in the ground at 150. And if you ever been in an F5 tornado, grass doesn't stay in the ground because that reaches 300-mile-an-hour winds. Now, keep in mind, as the Earth is tilting, the water wants to stand still as the continental crust is shifting. It takes a while for the water to kind of catch up. So you have this huge wall of tidal surge, not necessarily tsunamis, but a tidal surge that'll go 400 to 500 miles inland, which would be hundreds of feet high. And on top of that, you have, sizable waves because of the wind speeds. Most ships will be sunk on that side of the Earth that's receiving the tilt. Remember, if you're standing at the pivot point of the tilt, which is around according to my calcs, it'll probably be around the Middle East area, around the Persian Gulf, Jerusalem area, where the tilt would start. No, that's the pivot point. Well, your winds will be zero there. Okay, if you're 90 degrees from that zone, you're about midway of South America, just off the coast of North America, and you follow that around the globe. It takes you right through the middle of Australia, right through the Philippines, and all the way back to the North Pole to Greenland. Well, that's where the center of the tilt is, with the highest winds. There's enough data in the biblical records to mine that I can tell you right now, normal man didn't write all of this data. Not the future, because the model the order and what they're saying does not violate a model. They got the order correct, and the science, you can't do that consistently. Throughout the old records as well as the future event, they didn't violate a plasma model when you go and they got the order correct. You can't do that unless you have prior knowledge of the science. Now, how do you predict a future event that hasn't happened yet and get it? The biblical text says the next time this planet passes, that it is the worst time in all of Earth's history. Well, if Noah's flood happened, which I can prove, and that's not the worst, this next event, you're fixing to live through the most significant period in all of biblical story or narratives. In other words, you're going to be living through the biggest narrative portion of the scripture records.
Well, Gill, let me jump in real quick, because what worries me the most about this possibility of this pole shift is the 400 nuclear, there's more than them actually, over 400 nuclear reactors around the globe. I think there's 55 just along the Madrid fault line here in the U.S. So that in and of itself could be catastrophic.
Well, let me show you a little bit of that. I tend not to show that on the, but I will since you asked. Give me just one moment right here now.
Yeah, no problem. I'll just
reference maps. Here it is.
Sure.
Right here. This is these are those reactors that you're talking about. You also need to look at where the earthquake zone. There's also I think 5 major fault lines, almost equal to the San Andreas on the east coast that they're not telling the people. I found some data pertaining to that. That was but take a look at this. Now, keep in mind that when Earth tilts, Canada will be temporarily in the Arctic zone. Now, they also have nuclear power plants. I show some of them in Canada. But keep in mind, they're built for that climate zone. If you go into the Arctic zone with 150-mile-an-hour winds freezing temperatures, the water system is going to freeze. Their cooling water is going to freeze because it's not designed. Remember, I work for an engineering company. I read the specs, and we have to design it within certain criteria. That's outside the specs limits. These generators, the backup systems will fail. They're not made for that temperature. So if you take a look at this, this is if there's an island on the Canary, there's a certain island in the Canary Island group that half of it is split. It has a big fault across it. It's about ready to collapse into the ocean. Well, as this planet comes close, it's going to cause that island to slide. If it slides, you're looking at a tidal wave. You're looking at 9 tidal waves hitting the East Coast. The first one, according to the computer models that I've seen, the first one is 90 foot tall. And they're progressively small after that. 9 of them will hit the East Coast when the La Palma Island collapse. It takes about 8 to 9 hours for it to reach the coast once it starts. Then we have, I said, something like 21 nuclear facilities on the East Coast that's very close to the either on or near the coastline that could fail. Then we're looking at as this thing gets here, if we have a major impact that hits the Earth, which you can expect. This southern half right here that I showed at the bottom.
It's not coming up. There it is. Perfect.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
These are the nuclear power plants you were talking about. And when the La Palma Island collapses, the computer model shows 9 tidal waves hitting the East Coast. The first tidal wave is 90 foot tall, followed by 8 more. So the first tidal wave will not have time to recede before it's hit again, pushing the waters deeper and deeper inland. There's 21 nuclear facilities on the East Coast that some of them would definitely be threatened, but total of 21.
Look at how many's in Illinois. I mean, that state's going to get vaporized.
Right. That's so. And then the Gulf of Mexico, which we'll talk later, is actually the world's largest crater impact site. And you can find where the crater rim used to be, which is the outer curve that I'm showing here. Okay. This slid once in the past. That's why we have oil right here. That's buried plant life, green plant life, which is buried. That's why we have all this oil off the coast of Texas and Louisiana. We're shifting right now as I'm speaking. We've been shifting for the last 60 years or more. That's why we're losing our coast. That's not global warming. Once you have water that covers the roots of the plants, it smothers them. Then the grass dies, and then there's nothing holding the soil, and then it erodes away. And you don't see this on all of the coast. You see this where there's a cave-in about to happen, a collapse. And right at the edge of this outer rim I'm showing you is Toledo Bend. That's where they put a dam, because that's the edge of the crater rim. It was the ideal spot to put a dam right there, and they made an artificial lake right there. And this is going to collapse. That's going to take, looks like about 4 nuclear facilities to the bottom of the Gulf. And when that slide happens, you're looking at a tidal wave that goes all the way around Central America, which catches 2 of Mexico's nuclear facilities. The West Coast, the Bible talks about on the second event, which is 150 days later, a fiery mountain, which is wormwood, which is a meteor, which is part of the debris field that trails this.
A lot of people thought that was Chernobyl.
Right, but it's not. Once you see, whenever you're missing data, you can't paint the full picture of a story. We didn't
Right.
have this data until I did this research. This explains what Revelation is talking about. And the second event, you're going to have a meteor shower again, but it's going to be on the nighttime side of Earth on the 150 days later. The first event is on the daytime side of Earth. And this is going to be the second event, which is at nighttime. And one of the meteors is going to be as large as a mountain. Now, the one that made the Gulf of Mexico, you can take this and estimate 1/10 the crater size is how large the meteor was. That meant that the meteor was about 110 miles across. And that happened during Noah's time. That's what caused the waters to recede. And I can explain that later. So this next one has to be smaller than 110. Otherwise, it would wipe out all life form. So let's say it's 20 miles across. But it's going to hit the Pacific and it's going to cause a tidal wave. That means it's going to wipe out all of the nuclear facilities in Japan, China, along their coast. You're looking at the west coast of America being hit by a very large wave. And that also take out some of the nuclear facilities. And this is, you see right here, this is this blue area. That's the ash cloud or the ash covering of Mount St. Helens.
Okay.
Well, then this is Longview Caldera. That's see, we have 3 super volcanoes in America, not just one. We have 3. Yellowstone is one of the largest in the world, second largest, I believe.
Mount Rainier, is that one?
No, no, that's small compared to. This is
Okay.
Crater Lake, I believe, is the second,
Okay.
the third largest, and then there's Yellowstone. Now, this ring I draw is what they estimate to be the massive devastation, 500 miles, and within this 100-mile radius, they say total devastation. In other words, the pressure wave would probably kill people, as well as the heat and everything else involved. Now, the ash cover from 3 of its past, you see, eruptions covered all of these areas that I'm showing here. That's 3 of Yellowstone's previous explosions that had taken place. Yellowstone is showing all of the signs of this happening again. And this planet is going to be the final cause that causes it to erupt. Because the stresses that's going to be involved on Earth as it passes close to Earth, because the stresses on the remember, continental crust is only floating on a second layer, which is the oceanic layer, if you want to call it that. Ocean layer is the second layer. Continental crust is sitting on top of it, looks like a memory foam, and it slides around on there. Well, these stresses, when Earth starts to tilt, these continents are going to shift. As the Bible says, every island and mountain is going to be moved. That extra stress is going to cause Yellowstone to go off. And this is the type of ash cover that you can kind of expect. You can also expect that crops won't grow in the northern hemisphere for at least a year afterwards, because that happened once before in the past. I think the volcano was Tobo. I'm not quite sure. I'd have to look at the data. And that caused Europe didn't have a summer. They couldn't plant crops. A lot of people died. This is the lava that would come out of Yellowstone, because they know where it happened to pass. You know, they have these basalt fields where Yellowstone erupted. and it would go out into the Pacific, right where around Seattle, Washington. Well, you better view this from space as a lake of fire. The bottomless pit would be Yellowstone, basically. It's something that you can view from space. This is how large this event's going to be. Now, the Bible talks about a third of the grass, a third of the trees, and a third of the rivers being burnt up. Well, when he said rivers at a later point, that defined continental crust. He didn't say oceans. He's describing 1/3 of continental crust. Well, when you look at a globe, a circular, spherical shape, what half of the globe is 1/3? That's North and South America. Europe, Africa, and Asia is 2/3. It's telling us that the Bible's telling us that this half of the globe is going to be hit by a meteor, not a shower, meteor storm. There's a big difference between the two. And guess what? Nuclear facilities cannot take meteors coming down at 10 times a rifle bullet. And some of these facilities will do like Fukushima. They'll go up. Because even if a small meteor takes out their cooling facilities, let's say it doesn't take out the core, just takes out the cooling facilities, that thing's going to melt. Or if it hits the river that's supplying the water to cool it, and it creates an artificial dam temporarily. Only thing you need is less than 24 hours for that thing to go into meltdown.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Japan and Fukushima, Ukraine, Chernobyl. There's actually some stuff on the East Coast this year. I can't remember the name of the facility that had some issues with leakage of nuclear isotopes and stuff. So it's very frightening to think about the potential if they can't keep these things cool. So with that said, do you feel that there's going to be really anywhere to go, or is it pretty much once this happens, everybody's going to die?
No. This happened before, just that we never had nuclear facilities before.
Well, that makes it a whole new ball game, doesn't it?
Yeah, terrible, a real messy one. Remember how the Bible says after the first meteor shower, he says they will wish death for 5 months before death comes, which is the second meteor shower.
Well, aren't they talking about, like, in that specific topic, they get into these giant locusts with breastplates and stuff? What do you feel that that's remnants of meteors, or?
No, they're trying to describe a helicopter. They didn't have modern words. See, they didn't have a word even like meteor. They called meteors fiery hail. They don't have a word for this planet. They call it the fiery dragon of old. Okay, they call this large meteor that looks like wormwood. I'm going to show you an actual steel meteor, what it actually looks like. Now, if you only had natural materials to describe it, you're going to see how it truly fits. You're dealing with an ancient language that had limited vocabulary. They do not have the words we have today. You have to put yourself of that time period in that culture, which is a Hebrew culture, to understand what they're saying and what they're trying to emphasize. Without this data, we could not understand the stories correctly. They are describing an end-time event that says it's the worst in all of Earth's history. Now, remember, when the continents shift and the earthquakes go off, are bridges and roads able to be used? The answer is no. Now, if you need to push people to points to help them, like if it's FEMA camps or medical facilities, whatever, how would you do it? You'd use helicopters with a microwave beam that stings them. It stings them, but it doesn't kill them. It makes them enough pain to where they'll have to walk. You got to walk out of this event because roads are not usable.
Yeah, they're really pushing those microwave beam technology with law enforcement agencies and some of the military applications. That's definitely a possibility, and I didn't think about that. I'm glad you brought that to my attention. You also break down the different sills and how, if you read Revelations, there's a formula where sill 1 is released before 2, etc. And probably drones too. Maybe they were talking about that because it seems like that's certainly the wave of the future right now, the technologies that are available. I remember driving on I-10 back Labor Day last year, and I was in the middle of nowhere, Texas, and we were going about 80 miles an hour on the freeway. That's the speed limit at that location. And just above us and to the right, there was what I thought at first was a drone, but it wasn't like a drone that I had ever seen before. It looked like a miniature jet. And my wife said, she goes, "Oh, is that like a rich person jet or something like that?" Because it looked like just big enough for one person to fit into. And it stayed to the right of us, I would say about 2 o'clock. It wasn't even 100 feet above us. And then when it got in front of the car, it turned to the left and it just blasted off. It just went, and I did some research. I tried to find what kind of drone it was. And it's actually not a drone. It was a Lockheed Martin missile that they dropped from, F-22s and jets and stuff like that. So, wow, it's very fascinating.
Remember, the government is 30 to 40 years ahead of us. So the technology that you may see whispers of, they probably already got. This is the biblical and secular accounts that I was able to spot as far as when it passed by. From Noah's flood, and we can talk about all the way to Revelation, which is seal 6 and 7. And let me point out. See, this is the one I was telling you. Remember how it rained for 40 days? And then the earth stayed flooded for 150 total. Well, this is where the canopy of water was punctured in this. Here is where the canopy of water, they used to have a canopy of water around us. And remember how in school they talked about Pangea?
Oh, yeah.
Well, let me mention something in physics that tells you that that's nearly, impossible, the way that they bring the scenario around. If Earth is molten and it's forming crust and it's spinning, why would all the crust form on one side where the Earth is not imbalanced?
I don't know.
That goes against physics. Only way that can happen is if that Pangea is landlocked, because there was no oceans at the time. There was lakes and seas mentioned, but there was no oceans. The top canopy of water, there's outside books that said there was 7 meteors that punched holes in the canopy and it caused the floodgates of heaven. That's not a normal rain. The floodgates of heaven opened up, 7 of them. Took 40 days for Earth to flood. Earth stayed flooded 150 days. Now you can read into the accounts, 150 days. Noah felt a great wind come over the waters. He called it God's breath. Then he saw the waters recede. That was the pressure wave from a very large fiery mountain that hit the earth. That created the Gulf of Mexico. That knocked off 71% of our crust on the opposite side. Remember, this thing's coming in about 8 times a rifle bullet, the speed of a rifle bullet. That knocked off 71% of the existing crust of that time, and that happens to be the exact volume of our moon. Then the waters receded, and that made our oceans. And that's why you had Pangea. Now the Earth is wobbling, and that causes the continents they're already cracked, but that causes them to shift. Remember, the continents are not glued down. They're like floating on memory foam. So this heavy wobble caused them to move quite quickly to where they are today. It didn't move slowly. They were very well lubricated with the water. They had underground water talked about that came up, springs, because they had a structure underneath there of like a honeycomb structure that collapsed. And even the Russians had drilled into it. There's a saltwater region of crushed granite filled with salt water that's underneath the continents that they cannot explain. So this is a model here. This is to scale. This green layer is Pangea. This layer, this white layer is the Himalayas. This purple is a pressure wave that I'm going to show you. This area right here, this voided area, is the Gulf of Mexico. That's the diameter of it. When it came in at roughly 22 degrees, and how we know is when we piece the continents back together and we look where the Himalayas are, we can reverse the model and figure out the angle of attack. When this thing exploded, the pressure wave went to the core and it bounced off that solid core, and it made the Himalayas in seconds. Moving the core forward is what knocked 71% of our continental crust on the opposite side, creating the moon. Now, let me show you how big the crater is. Whenever you piece back where Africa needs to be, you can see where it used to be off the coast right here. All right. A lot of people try to make things fit from land to land, but that's not the way it was. You got to go where the shelf is off the coast. You see? You had lakes and streams between the two.
Okay.
That's almost like a perforated page. That's where it rips apart at, because it's the thinnest. Now, you see where Cuba is right here?
Uh-huh.
It's touching South America. Just recently, they found off the west coast of Cuba, right in here, a city 270 feet below the sea level. Huge mystery, because the Gulf has never been that low. They can't figure out how a city got there. Well, because it was existing at the time of the impact. This is where the Mayans and some of these ancient cultures were. They built on the tip here. And now, after the movement, the end of the area here collapsed into the ocean, and it preserved these ancient temples, which is like a pyramid, just like exactly what you see today in modern Mexico, those ancient temples. And they got one 270 feet below the sea level, and they can't figure out, because they know that the Mayans never went to Cuba. No, because Cuba was part of South America and the Yucatan Peninsula at one time. They touched.
So that might explain the quick disappearance of that culture.
Well, the part of it, because remember, the Mayans said they were asked by the Spaniards when they came, did y'all build some of these? He said, no, we just misinhabited them. Some of these things were already built.
Right.
Some of the so depending on I'm talking about pre-Mayan, basically, but I call it because it's mixed up with their culture. But this was pre-Mayan. This was prior to the flood. You see, and you can see a large impact makes a double rim. You can see where Florida had a lake cut in half right here. Well, you follow this curvature, you better see where the crater goes. The crater rim goes exactly where I was telling you. The southern part, the northern part of this crater rim is exactly at the edge of Toledo Bend. Is a dam right there, because it's a natural structure to put a dam to hold water. This crater is roughly 1,100 miles across. Now, scientists have a problem with this. When dealing with a crater so large, there's two levels of energy. One of them is the impact, and then there's a secondary energy field caused by frequency. That frequency violently vibrates carbon molecules where they spontaneously combust. So plant life, insects, animal life, humans would vaporize in a ring of fire that would go all the way around the globe, and no life would exist. Earth should be a burnt out cinder because of this impact. So they can't get past the math. Well, here's the city I was telling you about. That's underneath the edge of Cuba. 2,300 feet below the water. No, 395 feet below the water.
You know, I wonder why they found what the big deal was with pyramids back in the day. You ever thought about that?
There's definitely they did put a lot of effort, a lot of manpower in it. So why? I wanted to show you this right here. Remember, scientists have a problem with that crater because of the size of it.
Right.
Well, they never bothered to recalculate this, that the heat issue is resolved if the Earth is flooded, because water is a good absorber of heat. Only way that that crater could happen, that meteor, and life to exist, is if the Earth was entirely flooded. And the only way that the moon can be created, which is only made out of crust, there's no core to the moon, okay? The moon has gravity, but it has no magnetic field because it doesn't have a core. There's even iron oxide. The satellites found a huge amount of iron oxide. Well, if anybody knows chemistry, that should raise a anomaly there, right there. How do you get iron oxide on the moon when there's no atmosphere or water? Because you need, that's basically the simple term, that's iron rust. For rust to happen, you have to have oxygen and an atmosphere. How do you have rust in large quantities on the moon? Because that at one time had an atmosphere, but it was when it was on Earth. And keep in mind, the only way for the waters to recede is if you remove crust. 71% of the top crust is missing. If you put it back where the oceans are and you reduce the Himalayas down, you have a flooded Earth again. You have a logic triangle that you can't beat. Now, the only way that life could exist is if they were on a boat right here. You have the crater, you have the moon, and you have plenty of evidence showing the Earth was flooded. And because logically, mathematically, and physics involved, tells you this Gulf of Mexico as a crater cannot exist unless you have some way of solving the heat. And the only way you can do that is if you have a flooded Earth.
Now, there's also, if you look at the asteroid belt that's past Mars and the Kuiper belt that's past Pluto, there's a lot of talk that the possibility of those were planets at one time and something caused them to explode, and now they're asteroid belts. I'm wondering if you follow that same theory and if you believe that Planet X could have been the possible reason for that.
Yes, we have a bunch of anomalies in our solar system that without this intruding planet, you don't have a cause. You see the effects, but you don't have a cause. Science is applying cause and effects. So without this planet being really, truly real, you can visibly see effects, but you have no reasonable cause for it. Because Pluto used to be a satellite moon of Neptune. Matter of fact, it crosses Neptune's orbit still. That's why they declassified Pluto as a planet. Because one of the terms that they redefined as a planet, that a planet cannot cross another planet's orbit. One of them cannot be a planet. But what's interesting about this, they got a dilemma coming up. Planet X crosses Earth's path, and it's bigger than us. Which one do you disqualify as a planet?
I don't think you can.
So they have to either come up with this object, they have to qualify it different. They have to come up with a whole new term because it has some similarity of a comet. It's definitely bigger than many of our planets. So they have to come up with a whole new term, and that gives them plausible deniability. You ask them, what about this planet? They'll say, what planet? What about this comet? What comet? You have to say, what about this heavenly body that's coming in? If you don't use the proper terms, then they have political correctness will not get you your answer that you're looking for.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Let me give you a quick view of the Himalayas. So you see how it has a semicircle arc to it?
Yeah, I was just looking at that.
Well, take a look at this real quick. This is a satellite map that NASA did that shows the gravity. This darker areas that showed where gravity is the heaviest or greatest. You're heavier in this area of Earth than any other portion of Earth, because gravity is associated with the density of matter. And the only way that you can get this is a punch from underneath. This is the pressure wave. See how circular it is? It was a punch from underneath the crust that compacted the matter, giving you greater density, increasing the gravity. This gravity ring is actually a bruise caused from the impact. And the Himalayas was the weaker area, so it popped up in seconds. It's 3 to 5 miles higher than the rest of the terrain. It came up in seconds.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And air is rock. I can find you the same color terrain, color of this material. You see all these striations are all lateral?
Uh-huh.
That's not normal. That's not. Wind can't do that because it's not constant in one direction. That's rub marks. Well, now this doesn't match the surroundings. See, they know that this is not natural. It's called a monolith. They don't know how these monoliths got here. They know it didn't come out from outer space because it's not charred. It's not burnt. They know it didn't hit with any speed, like 8 times a rocket, because there'd be a crater here. It had a soft landing. And when something is landing soft, you see the surrounding rocks, how it came up. See all these dark areas? That's rocks that vibrated out of the ground. Whenever like you shake a box of popcorn, the larger pieces come to the surface. Well, that's what happened, right? This is all these dark areas because it shook the ground when it landed. Well, if you take a look at 13 miles to the area here, you see a drag mark. Because one of the ways to slow the speed of this down, suppose it was ejected from the Himalayas at a shallow angle. It never got into the upper, and Australia was closer to India, which it was at one time. And during the making of the Himalayas, it ejected this piece. It touched down right here, losing part of its speed, flipped over, just like you toss a rock on a lake. You skip it across. It skipped right here, flipped over a few times, and landed softly. It lost most of its energy. Take a look at you think it matches? Similar?
Not at all.
Size? These are rub marks right here. This is where, now throughout the ages, because the continents are shifting a little bit, it's not as straight as what it normally, because this happened about 3,000 years ago or more. But that shows you how that monolith happened. And this happens to be the direction of India. I mean, the Himalayas. And this would explain how the monoliths got there with a soft landing. Now, the other one, this is the second largest. The other one is larger, but it's buried many times deeper because it didn't skip. It landed firmly and it planted itself. It didn't make a crater because it didn't have enough speed, but it buried itself just like you drop a rock in soft mud because of the weight of it. We have enough evidence to prove out Noah's flood. And let me jump to another one.
And while you're pulling that up, let me ask you, because I forgot to bring this up earlier, that giant scar on Mars? Looks like a big scar. It's a big canyon, but
yes.
Do you think that could be from Planet X?
Without a doubt. During the, we'll touch on this right now. We'll just jump ahead to the Exodus. Okay? During the Exodus, they had 3 days of darkness. Solid darkness where you couldn't hardly see your hand in front of you. Now, it's also documented 3 hours of darkness during Yeshua. So how do we get a difference of 3 hours versus 3 days? Well, what happened was that it collided with a planet called Ceres, which is now known as the asteroid belt. It destroyed that planet and broke it up with a head-on collision. And what that caused, it slowed the path of it slowed the speed of it down to 1/20th of its normal speed. That caused the 3 days of darkness. Now, if you go and connect the dots a little bit, look at the biblical records a little bit more, you see how it took 4 trips around the sun before it regained a normal orbit. The first trip around the sun and it came back at 52 years later. Guess what? That's Joshua's long day. The next one was 131 years later. That was Job's trouble and the drought of Ruth. 131 years later. Okay, yeah. All right. Let's see. Yeah, 131 years was Job's trouble and Ruth. 290 years later was King David. That's where you got the Star of David. This was during the battle between Saul and David, and it showed up exactly on that year between the two. Then there was Hezekiah. They had 3 events on the one that was 358 years later. You had Jonah warning Nineveh, in 40 days your destruction comes. Guess what? In the model, you can prove out at 40 days Earth can see it as it rounds the sun. How did they know that? Then Hezekiah, where the shadow went backwards. It wasn't going backwards on a sundial. That's a misinterpretation in English. When you read the Hebrew, it's steps. The sun went backwards on steps. Well, that means Earth tilted. The math shows us that Earth tilted 26 to 28 degrees again. We have 3 to 4 events we can prove the Earth tilted 26 to 28 degrees. Then 5 months later on the second event, this is when 185,000 Assyrian soldiers died in the middle of the night. When the king had woke up the following morning, all the soldiers were dead. If you know anything, remember how NASA takes satellites when they want to send them into deeper space? They don't have enough.
Right.
They send them around a planet 3 or 4 times, and that slingshot effect, they get more and more energy. Then they dart them out to the direction they want. This is the same thing that happens with this planet. When it would drop down to 1/20th, it took 4 more trips around the sun before it gained its normal orbit, because its orbit is associated with its mass. The bigger the mass, the larger, the longer the orbital path has to be. In other words, if you have an orbit of so-called 3,600 years, which there's no hard evidence to back such a claim. No one gave hard data. They make claims of 30, but they give no hard data. Someone out there is even stating that Dr. Harrington made with stitching, that Dr. Harrington was claiming that it was no, he didn't. You have to listen very carefully to the video and then read his own report that he published. He published a report that his estimate, which is an educated guess, of 1,150 something years. He said for it to be a 3,600 year old, it had to be many times larger than Jupiter. Remember, at 7 times the diameter of Earth, that's only about a third of Jupiter. And it had to be multiple times larger to get a 3,600 year orbit. Well, guess what? Something that big can't pass between the moon and the Earth that's claimed in Joshua's long day. nor will it give you 3 hours of darkness in Yeshua's time traveling at its normal speed. It takes an object only 6 to 7 times the diameter of Earth. The math does not work out in multiple ways for a 3,600-year orbit, nor does the size, because your orbit is set by its mass, the slingshot effect. Kepler's laws of planetary motion. You got to follow these things. We'll talk about Joshua's long day right here. Joshua received word from an ally theirs that they had 5 kings that amassed their army, and they were getting ready to wipe out this ally of Joshua and the kings. He says, "Don't abandon me. I need your help." They had amassed over 300,000 soldiers. Joshua only had 30,000. He did a forced march throughout the night to the northern part of Israel. Now, you can read in the text that the enemy woke up that morning and they were scared. And you can allude through the text, you can surmise that the sun was late coming up, because they said they woke and they got scared. They didn't see Joshua's men yet. Something was scaring them. And it's because the sun didn't rise yet. That gave more time for Joshua to make it to the place, to the enemy's camp. Because if you measure out the distance, they needed more time to make it. Then as when he's get there, he doesn't rest. He goes straight into battle. He attacks. Now they already had the fear in the camp, and they're going in there yelling and attacking. The enemy starts to run. Then midway in the battle, he calls out to God, said, "Give us more time so we can annihilate our enemy. We need more time. We need 12 extra hours of daylight." Well, if you read the text, the meteors come down, only killing the enemy. None of Joshua's 30,000. Remember, this is hand-to-hand combat. Sword with a sword. You're only a foot and a half away from your enemy. And only the enemy died from the meteor hit. You see, if the moon is in an exact position, it's acting as a shield for Joshua's men. The back side of the moon has 4 times more craters than the front side. The reason why the front side faces Earth, because it has more iron on that side. It acts like a compass needle. It points to the magnetic of Earth, because the magnetic field is a greater radius than the gravity field. So the moon is locked in looking at Earth at all times. That's why we only see the near side of the moon. The backside has protected us multiple times. Not the entire globe, only part of the globe. Right here, it's protecting Joshua's men. And only the enemy is being annihilated. And this is where you can see the model where, let's see if I have it here, where Earth is going through the tail. You see this black dot in the center, and this white dot, that's Earth. This green circle is the orbit of the moon. This darker dot is our planet 7X, I call it. The plasma tail, which is often clear, sometimes it's illuminated, points opposite of the sun. So this red line is the orbit of our planet. This green line is the orbit of Earth. And as this thing moves forward, Earth is getting deeper and deeper into the plasma. And this is what's causing Earth to slow down at 4.5 to 5.5% compounded hourly, and Earth will come to a stop within 24 to 28 hours. So it started a little bit during the nighttime. That gave Joshua more time to reach the camp of the enemy. And this proves out in the model. This is going to happen a second time. The astronomy group is going to warn Earth of the wrong side being hit. They're going to say the meteor shower is going to hit the the Middle East region, Europe, Africa, Asia, and they will not calculate a 12-hour delay because it takes 50 years usually of arguing before they'll change the books. Right now, the camp of physicists are small, and they don't have the voice because there's an unwritten law that one science group doesn't cross into the other science group. Well, the physicists just crossed over into astronomy. And there's too many people in astronomy that wrote their thesis on how gravity is controlling the universe. These people got to die out before textbooks or anything is changed that the universe is plasma ruled or electromagnetic ruled. And without this data, most of the people will get on the wrong half of the earth for this event. They'll think North and South America is the safe side. Now, in fact, this is the Antichrist false miracle. Because of the terrorist activity that's listed in Seal 4, over 1/4 of the globe is under the threat of death, that part is under terrorism. Once they have a peace agreement, then after the peace agreement, remember how it says when peace is announced, soon after destruction happens? I can't quote it exactly the way it says it.
Sure.
This is the meteor shower of Seal 6 because Seal 5 is the peace agreement. Seal 6 is the meteor shower.
When do people get microchipped?
Well, during the rationing, during economic collapse, and during the food shortage in Seal 4. See, for you to control the people, you have to ration money, which is a bail-in. That's what they're doing. They're rationing money. Seal 4, there's going to be global terrorism, so that's going to disrupt the economy, and you have rationing of food. Then you have rationing of fuel happening because of war going on. When you have those three, you control the population of the world. You have them under your Homeland Security clauses and laws. So for people to get their rationing, they'll issue out credit cards with chip, and it'll be a voluntary basis to take that misinjected chip. And on that card will say how much of what item that you're going to be getting and how much fuel you're going to get. Now, the Almighty has already prepared his people for this coming event, because he says in the text, he says, these are my instructions. These are not the feast of the Jews. That's a wrong interpretation. The Hebrew word is mekra, and it does not mean feast. It means dry rehearsal. It says, these are my rehearsal patterns, and it's the Father speaking. It says, these are mine, and you hold them forever. On a Sabbath year and a Jubilee, you're supposed to stock up food, it says, for each of those full year. Well, that meant Seal 3, economic collapse, and Seal 4, famine, has to happen either on a Sabbath year or a Jubilee. We're just about finished with a Sabbath year, and we're starting into a Jubilee year. In one of those 2 years, you're going to see Seal 4 and 5, Seal 3 and 4 happen. Economic collapse and famine. His people who follow his instructions are prepared for this. Most of the world won't, because they're not following his instructions. The data in the biblical records is too exact. You can't guess anything to this level consistently through 14 events and tell me that it's by luck.
You know, another thing that I think of too is the Smithsonian and a very select few corporations control literally the majority of information that people have access to with archaeological sites, history, information, education, indoctrination, etc. So maybe they suppress a lot of this information, and that's why a lot of people unless they really do the digging, don't have access to much of it.
Like I said, well, I can give you, let me tell you a true life story that happened to me. I'm not a conspiracy nut, basically. You know, I didn't believe in conspiracy. Let me just qualify that better. I didn't believe in conspiracy. I'd say that there's either natural causes or something else or accident, whatever. I would always explain them away to something more logical or rationing. In my travels, I've been able to travel in different parts of the world. In my travels, even in the U.S., a friend of mine brought me to a gentleman's home that was the richest man in the world twice in his life. We were sitting down at his kitchen table, and I sat there and I listened to a conversation between the two gentlemen. The other gentleman was a Yale graduate, and there was this man that was the richest man in the world twice in his life. And they were talking about the Illuminati, the Hindenburgs, and all that. And I didn't believe in that at that time. But I just sat there, you know, when you're ignorant about something, sometimes it's better just to stay quiet than open your. And I listened for 45 minutes while these gentlemen were speaking. And I just couldn't believe my ears. So I interrupted the gentleman and said, "Gentlemen," I said, it sounds like you're talking about these Hindenburgs and the trilaterals as if they're real. They both turned to me and says, "Oh yeah, they're real." And what was going on, these two gentlemen were each president in their own area of the country of the John Birch Society, the people who fight for our constitutional rights.
Oh, yeah.
And they even told me, remember that Korean liner that was shot down by the Russians because that liner supposedly crossed into Russian
Yeah.
airspace? This happened maybe, 20 years ago or so, 15 years ago?
Yeah, about that.
All right. Reason why that plane was shot down, there was a congressman and the president of the John Birch Society was on that plane. They were making too much headway towards our constitutional rights. At that time, I had to change my opinion because these people were very honorable and they were in the know. They were world individuals. They traveled, they did business, they knew the bank, they knew it inside out. And I had it firsthand information. It was real. Then I had to change my opinion. Well, Planet 7X, I was just as stubborn. I said, Planet X. But there's so much disinformation on the internet right now that is absolutely, positively incorrect. Remember the 3,600 years, I just proved it to you. That's not south of the universe is not pointing polar south. They even point you in the wrong direction. There's even some Washington Post articles that's leading you in the wrong direction. They point you to Monsieur Orion. That ain't it. All of the other articles, when you do the math and the science and the overlay, it's where they sent the Pioneer and Voyager probe, Sagittarius. You got to be able to use data to separate what is propaganda, if you want to call it, or hype, and what is real. Only the real proves out mathematically. Because someone who's trying to make something up is going to make an error. And I can point to you the errors when they make a story up in the Washington Post. For one, that's one of the worst ones to get actual facts from. And it's just incredible amount of data.
Well, and you're talking about disinformation. Let's jump on that bandwagon for just a moment because there's tens of thousands of photographs out there right now that some might say is Nibiru or Planet X or Wormwood or a sundog or an anomaly or a reflection or swamp gas or a UFO or a comet or Mercury. You know, there's so many different explanations and so many different possibilities. What is your take on being able to see Planet X right now?
There is no valid sighting in the public realm. They may have a valid sighting in the government realm, through their satellites and other ways and everything, but there's no valid sighting in the public realm of our planet at the moment. They have the ability to cloak an object, and I even showed a video on how they're able to cloak an object. They use lasers, and they can bend light. That means also the spectrum of infrared, because that's part of the spectrum of light. Okay. Remember when Ronald Reagan gave a speech to the UN, and he made it sound like it was aliens. So
Oh,
he
yeah.
said if we had an outside threat,
Oh,
how
yeah.
we would join in a common cause of defeating this threat. He wasn't talking about it. He was talking about this planet. Because what happened following right after they put a laser base
Star Wars.
Satellite supposedly for defense. No, you need the lasers in space to cloak it. Because that's what the laboratory showed. The laboratory models. I have a DVD out called Planet 7X. Well, some of the data we were trying to put it out as soon as possible. Well, some of the data we didn't have collected yet. So we released the DVD, but we came back with some bonus features that you can see off my YouTube channel, Planet 7X on the YouTube channel, where it shows laboratory tests on how they can bend light. They can put you can put your hand in front of you, and when it's in front of the lasers, you can't see it. You see everything behind it. You don't see your own hand. You see a hole in it. You know it's there, but you see everything behind it. If someone walks behind it, you see it, but you don't see your hand. And they're able to bend light. Remember, light is matter. Remember what Einstein said. Matter is just light changed to a frequency that we can observe. When you read the Hebrew and find out what the Almighty is, it describes him in this manner. He's not male, he's not female, he's not human, he has no form or shape. He's 7 levels of spirits. Well, the word in Hebrew for spirit can also mean energy. 7 levels of energy. And we're talking about intelligent, omnipotent, all-knowing, everything of energy. Not regular energy. Not dumb energy. Because dumb energy cannot gather in a way to create something more intelligent or better. Okay, like a explosion. You can have explosions all day long. You're not going to create something intelligent out of it. It takes something that had to have thought process to be able to create stuff, life and everything. Because there's not a single example out of all of the explosions, out of the entire world, from nuclear to dynamite to air, there's not a single thing that they created that's life form out of a explosion. They had plenty of tries, I think. So if you take what that is, what the Father is, and look at Einstein, he says, remember, the first law of the thermodynamics, energy cannot be destroyed or created. It always existed. The same energy we have in day one of creation is the same amount of energy we have today. There's no new energy in the universe. The same amount. That also means, taking Einstein's theory into effect, that all matter is just light changed to a frequency that we can observe. You're living in the Elohim matrix.
That's an awesome way to put it. I like that. Everything is visible, just a different spectrum of light. Amazing.
It's a hologram that he created for our benefit. This is uniquely designed for us. And over a third of the scientists would tell you this. Earth is in a unique place, and if you, I have a DVD here. I just watched the thing. It's called the Principle, maybe. Let me see. I don't have it right here in front of me. But they interviewed scientists on one-on-one basis, and the data shows that everything is radiating. The center of creation is focused around Earth. Multiple wings of data that point to this. that we're unique. Creation started from a focal point of Earth, or our universe, let's say, our solar system, and everything is radiate out from this point of center, and that confuses the heck out of them, because that only lives to a creator, that we're that unique. I'm telling you, I cannot prove the Bible. And he says, the Bible tells you to challenge it. It says, believe in me, but challenge me. I challenge them with a calculator and science. And when you use the proper science, oh, it's unreal what you're getting out of this.
Do you think that there is a possibility that the translation that Zechariah Sitchin put together with the tablets and the Anunnaki and the return of the Anunnaki with Nibiru, etc., is there any validation to that in your opinion?
I like Sitchin. I'm not trying to say that he forged something purposely. Let me clear that up. I'm not after the man or anything, but I'm looking for data. Give me orbital speed, give me orbital mechanics, give me a layout of where it was seen, sighted, place, time, date, something I can plot or calculate. It does not exist in his data. It doesn't exist in Anunnaki's data. That tells me it's made up. If you can't mimic something in science, but you don't know the science, and it's there, guess what? You saw something real. Because you couldn't have faked it because you didn't know the science yet. And throughout the Bible, that's self-evident in 14 documented cases. You can't have it consistently right and tell me they faked it. With science they had no knowledge of, we didn't even have the knowledge of till the last 15 years or so. It's a fictional story. We can go back to the Egyptians writing stories that they won certain battles. Even the Babylonians made claims they won. Well, matter of fact, remember the 185,000 soldiers that died out of right outside of Jerusalem? Well, that king went back to his town and said, "We won," and he wrote it in history as if he won, and he didn't win. The Egyptians never came back and said they lost. So do we have a year when fictional stories started? Yes, from the beginning. But it comes, okay? You have to back up that the only way you can find out that something is not fictional is if it has data built into it that had no knowledge of, that qualifies it. Okay, they saw something or did something real. Like if you have archaeological finds that back up. You see, like the story of the Tower of Babel. That's real. How do we know that? Because they just found it. Within the last 10 years, they've been digging at a site in Jordan, north of the Dead Sea, not south. When you follow the biblical narrative, it says where the guy was standing at the time that he was looking at Sodom and Gomorrah. That town exists today in Jerusalem still. When you walk at that area, you can only see the north portion of the Dead Sea. And it says there was a circular plain, and there's one there, and that's where he went and looked. There's a compound, there's a tell, which is the remains of an ancient city, 55 acres large. It's the largest city known in that time period that they've ever found. They dig down in there, guess what they find? They find homes that were blown off of their foundation from some large explosion. They got people where their bodies were thrown against the wall, completely shattered. They got homosexuals that died in bed together. They got clay pottery that's so charged with such high heat that outside of the pottery glass turned to glass. And that's called, I think, tritidite. I think it's called, or something like that. Only found at nuclear or atomic explosion sites where it turns the sand to glass.
Yeah, I know in India they had one that was like 12,000 years old, somewhere around there.
Right. So they found this at this site, and they found the residue of an asteroid that exploded. Remember that that asteroid that exploded over Russia?
Just a couple years ago, wasn't it?
Correct. The you try to pull up some data here for you. 50% of the of inbound meteors explode before touching the ground, and they explode at different elevations. Those towns in Russia were very lucky. If it would have exploded closer to that city, it would have vaporized people and put buildings on fire, exactly mimicking the Sodom and Gomorrah event. We can, in other words, remember how it says Lot's wife would turn to a pillar of salt? Well, that's a description of man coming back looking for her, not that God said I was going to turn her to a pillar of salt. Okay? That's the difference. If you go back, you can see this. Remember in Nagasaki when the atomic explosion happened?
Yes.
You could see the shadows of people on stone walls and steps and bridges where they were vaporized, but because of the shadow protected the cement from light, well, the microorganisms and dust that were embedded in the cement didn't get vaporized. All of the other areas which was exposed by the light got cleaned perfectly, leaving only the shadows of where the people stood. So how would ancient man describe a shadow of this type to the shape of a man? They said God turned him into a stone. That's what they said about her. Remember, they said, do not look back. There was 2 cities that actually exploded, Sodom and Gomorrah. When she heard the first explosion, and the reason why she went back, because she had more than 2 daughters. Some other daughters that she had stayed behind. When she heard the first explosion, she went back to check on them, and she wasn't supposed to. The second blast happened, vaporizing her, leaving a shadow on the wall of the town. I believe it was the wall. I don't believe it was a stone in the middle of a area. It was she was behind the gates, then she came out behind to see about the city. And she was vaporized. This is the professor, Steve Collins, from Trinity Southwestern University that found Sodom and Gomorrah. This is where it is, right here. Tel El Haman is called. This is this is the mountain that used to be the city. This is what the artist's rendering of it. These are the remains of what they found. They found the gate that the 2 angels walked through. They found the bedrock that proves that many people were died there, and how the foundations were, some of the houses were blown off of their foundation. The southeast corner, I believe he said, where all those homes were blown off the foundation. And here's a picture of the world's oldest homosexual couple in Sodom right there. 5,000-year-old. So now keep in mind, I had portrayed this story over a year ago, and the findings are just now coming out on the results of that dig, proving out the story that this planet is what delivers this shower of meteors. And this is the one I was talking about, Hezekiah, in the Hebrew text. This is where the sun's shadow goes back 10 steps. This is Hezekiah's stele they found in an archaeological dig right here. You see a disc with wings. This is the literal way that you would present something in the ancient time. The wings meant it flew across the sky. Not that it literally had wings, that had movement. A large object moved across the sky, shaking the earth, and it was a memorable moment. Remember, the earth tilted. You had high winds, the whole 9 yards. That scared everybody. And I give the passages. Now, I estimate, let's see now, keep in mind, if this object passed close to Earth, you'd have electrical discharge the same way that Comet Siding Springs did to Mars. You should have some impact craters on Earth. All of that scarring that you would mention about on Mars earlier, remember when I told you it lost its speed to where it moved to 1/20th?
Right.
To have that amount of craters on Mars is because it was going slower. And it probably turned around and it stayed in orbit with Mars for a little bit before it headed towards the sun. So it had plenty of time to gouge out the large scar. And because Mars would have been caught up in its plasma tail, Mars would have either slowed down very slowly or even stopped, allowing this constant digging to take effect. It's the only way that you can explain that. That is not by a casual flyby traveling at 88,000 miles per hour. You'd only have a couple of hits in crater form. Like, see, this is where it passed on Mars. Mars lit up like a light bulb. This is Comet Siding Springer. This is a small comet compared to that planet. Now just think if you reversed it around. This planet is 6 to 7 times larger than Earth. What kind of lightning strike do you think is going to hit the Earth? If a little comet can do that to Mars.
Right.
So here's a crater in Africa called the Eye of the Sahara that scientists have proven is not a meteor crater because it's not concave. There's no glass there representing a impact. It doesn't have any of the material you would associate with a meteor impact. On this western region, it cut away 300 foot of depth out of the mountain. This is a plasma strike when this planet was passing by. Think of a 30-mile wide lightning bolt dissolving away the rock in the mountain. There's a Greek myth they call remember where Zeus would throw lightning bolts that would melt mountains?
Yeah.
Well,
Zeus.
this planet was called Zeus and Jupiter because it passed during their time period. And right here you can see where it literally melted part of a mountain. Remember, they didn't have words for planets. They gave them names. Sometimes they called it Mars, sometimes they called it Jupiter, sometimes they called it Zeus. Just like Baal and all these other pagan, they're talking about this object.
Well, it's interesting how they have different representations and, kind of, I guess you could say, marquee statements in representation towards each planet, and each god represents that planet in a certain way. So,
well, because remember, it's people who are trying to interpret, but they were missing a piece of the puzzle. So they're looking at, okay, it's one of our planets in the solar system. But they never assumed that there was an unknown planet. They mislabeled them. They were talking about this object that came close, and the Bible is called the Great Destroyer or the Fiery Dragon of old. In the Chinese text, it's called the guest star. In the Egyptian culture, it's called something else. See right here, this is some of the craters on Mars. This is not a meteor impact because the bottom is flat.
Huh. Okay.
A meteor crater causes a concave. A flat hit is where it's a plasma strike. And a plasma strike will cause these veins that look like water. See, Mars, Venus, and Mercury are along the path of its travel. And all of these planets have these plasma strikes on them.
Plasma strikes. Yeah, that's new information for me. I appreciate you bringing that to our attention.
Now, every time Earth is hit with this heavy strike, whenever you hit a magnet with a lightning bolt, it changes its polarity. It has been documented that Earth's polarity has changed multiple times. But they don't realize what's causing it. See, if Earth has a dozen strikes, each time it's hit, it changes the polarity of the Earth in just one passing. Remember, you have 12 hours of its passing. Maybe 4 hours or maybe 2 hours of that is lightning strikes. But you're going to have, so keep in mind when we're in the plasma tail, that all generators will have to be turned off globally probably 3 days before it's crossing. We spend in the plasma field almost 24 hours, 24 to 28 hours. That's like an EMP effect.
It's going to be like something out of Street Fighter 2. I mean, my goodness, you're going to see plasma beams and stuff like that? Are you serious?
Well, it's the same. Well, what you're going to see is when we it's not going to be a plasma strike like a lightning bolt when we enter the tail. This plasma strike, what I'm talking about is when it gets close to us. When it's far away from us, like 24 to 28 hours before it crosses our path. Remember, the tail of the comet, if you want to call it that, is pointing at Earth, and Earth is entering deeper and deeper into that plasma tail. The aurora borealis is caused by plasma from the sun hitting it. Well, when this tail hits us, we're going to have the aurora borealis go all the way to the equator. The northern and southern aurora is going to, that side, you're going to see it light up thicker and more brilliant in color than you've ever seen it. And when it's that active, it's going to howl like a trumpet, as the biblical text quotes.
And this is going to fry all the satellites and communications and
yes, it will.
Computers and
unless they're off at the time. Globally, all generators will have to be turned off 3 days prior to this event. The Bible even gives an indication. The wise virgin and the foolish virgin are burning oil lamps. That's because they have to. EMP does not affect an oil lamp. Remember how it says the four winds, that 4 angels go out and stop the wind of the earth? The winds can only be, okay, well, the winds of the earth can only stop if the rotation of the earth stops. Remember, during Joshua's long day, the earth stopped rotating. It's going to stop again by 12 hours. 12 hours is exactly half of a day, which is half of the globe. The opposite side of what they would expect will be hit because of the 12-hour delay in Earth's rotation. North and South America would be hit. The winds will stop because Earth's rotation stops. It's mentioned in the biblical record. The 4 winds stop.
Do you think that it's just one planet that's coming back our way, or do you consider the possibilities of there being not only a planet but also a dwarf star and other moons surrounding it, like a second solar system coming towards us also?
See, with our present knowledge now of the plasma universe, a sun is not a planet. It's a plasma ball, basically. It's bringing in plasma through the North and South Pole and radiating it out down the axis, which is the center, the planetary plane. That's why all the planets are caught in this stream. You ever seen a trout moving up?
Definitely.
Upstream, like he can be stationary even though the water's flowing 20, 30 miles an hour. He can station because it's the way the stream works. The same thing. This plasma is flowing from the sun outward at a great, which is called the solar winds. Solar winds is the plasma. And these planets are rotating within a magnetic trough. Okay? Same thing with the orbits of comets and everything. See, the reason why we're having more comet strikes hitting the Earth is because this planet is warping the orbits of comets that normally would miss us. And their orbits are perturbed, and now it's interfering and running into our orbital path. And that's why we're seeing more strikes.
Well,
and to get back to your question, okay, this can't be a mini solar system. It can't be a sun even, because because it has to come so close to Earth, it has to cause us to tilt. Gravity of a sun is so great, which we're talking about magnetic attraction for the opposite poles attract. That's why it only tilts 26 to 28 degrees. If a sun was to pass between the moon and the Earth, that would only happen once. We'd be dragged out into outer space, and that would be it. End of story. This is a planet-sized object. Now, does it have moons, satellite moons? Possible. I can't say no to that because I can tell you one thing, it's not listed in the data that I found. But it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's just that I'm not qualified to talk about it because I found no data associated with it to better say that this thing has moons orbiting. So it doesn't mean it doesn't, and it's possible that it may have one. Because right now, it says we'll see a crown of 12 stars. Remember, the word star in Hebrew meant illuminated body. And this could be a moon representing the 12th star because Leo is 11, normally drawn in the Hebrew. It's drawn like a lion. Remember, the way you draw the constellations have changed throughout the years. It changes from software to software. And that 12th object, which is puzzling me, I thought maybe it might have been the king planet Jupiter. Well, that would have been March 26th for this lineup. One of the possibilities. Because the software, it greatly concerned me, I said. I have no way of predicting the future. But the Almighty can, and He writes it for us. So I was concerned about that date, but we have not seen it. Neither has CO3, 4, and 5 occurred. You have to have CO3, economic collapse, CO4, famine and war, and 5, a peace agreement, before you can have the meteor shower of 6 and 7. So when you see those, and the internet will be down until the peace agreement, because the whole world sees the Antichrist signing the peace agreement. That's how you're going to know him. So the internet is up then. But in between that time, during this rationing and stuff, because of terrorism and everything, you're going to have your internet down. You won't be able to call me and say, that object in the sky, what is it? You have to be able to identify this and know what it is before the internet goes down. and you got to know what to do then. And when you see a peace agreement being talked about to be signed in Jerusalem, you make sure you're in Jerusalem for the signing of that peace agreement, and then wait there in Jerusalem. Your passport is good for 3 months in Jerusalem. You wait there until Passover comes around, March or April, and that's when the two witnesses will appear for the feast. And shortly after that, the Messiah appears, and he brings you to a place of safety on earth, in the wilderness, it says. And only a remnant will make it to this place of safety. There's two taking aways in the Bible, not one. One is only for a remnant. The second one is for the entire body of believers, the dead are first, then the living. But he already qualified that if you go through the Great Tribulation without being in this place of safety that I'm providing, and you make it, count yourself lucky. Very few you will. Because he said, this is the time of Jacob's trouble. Jacob is Jews and Christians, basically. And they're going to be hunted down by Esau. Esau is the Muslims. They're going to hunt you down like dogs, cutting off your heads.
Do you think that's kind of the push right now as far as the mental conditioning process, the intertwinement of the Muslim culture into Western culture, and you've got all of these refugees and people coming from Syria and other places out there, others war torn, and a lot of them are actually the perfect age and form for militants. So do you think that could be kind of the beginning of this process that you're discussing?
The New World Order needed a war. They need to cause a crisis, and then they come back with a solution for it, which they're the ones creating both of these. So they create the crisis. You think, since when are you sending millions of Muslims to Christian community when there's plenty of land in Muslim? I mean, Saudi Arabia has a tent city with air conditioning, sewage, everything to hold close to 1 million or more people. And it's not being used. But yet they're sending Muslims to Christian, and they're turning down Arab Christians from coming over. They're only allowing the Muslims to come in because there's an agenda. Within these groups are terrorists. Remember, a quarter of the world, that's 1.8 people, is under the threat of death. You got to have a way of getting enough of these terrorists in these Western countries, because 1.8 billion is roughly the Western nations that they have to put under lockdown of what? Rationing of money, food, and fuel. Homeland security. You follow the biblical, it says prepare food, water, or whatever, supplies for the Sabbath and a Jubilee. You got 1 more year left before the Messiah is, if we got the Jubilee correct, and it appears so. But if you wait till economic collapse of bail-in, then you can't remove money to get your food and stuff. That will happen almost overnight. You either follow the biblical instructions ahead of time, otherwise you will be caught in the globalist trap that they're setting for you. And he's already pre-warned you.
Well, I mean, many people now live paycheck to paycheck, but even those that do have a decent amount of money saved up for possibilities of hard times, a lot of it's in the bank. And like you said, how easy would it be for, oh, sorry, you can't have access to your bank account today. There was some type of computer virus, or there's a glitch, or we're updating the software, or there's a satellite that went down, or, anything they can come up with. So hang on to some cash and supplies and everything else. Now, I first of all, Gill, I would like to thank you so much for coming on here with us at the Leak Project. I know that you canceled a dinner reservation with a friend of yours, so thank you.
It's my pleasure, and if you wish to cover any of the other data that we didn't touch on yet, I'll be more than welcome to come back or answer any of your audience questions if you want to collect some of their questions, and we can try to answer some of them.
You know,
But
that'd be fantastic. Absolutely. I know that you said you did a session in Russian or for Russia that went 6 hours, and I would certainly love to pick your brain longer and get information and questions put together.
well, if you want to ask your audience if they would go to www.planet7x.net, we have a DVD that this is a hard topic to talk to people about, especially to show a pastor or a Bible study group or any of them. You can play this to groups, and it enlightens them on the technical level that this, in other words, I share what brought me out of being a skeptic into this is a real object. Then the book, which is free, takes you through all of the biblical narrative and five secular groups, five secular event. They can download that for free from the same site at the bottom. And this would educate your audience to where they can develop questions, and helps them get a grip of this before the internet goes down. Remember, I can tell you about Los Alamos that's been testing a new internet for 4 years. It's impervious to virus, but they won't implement it because it's not part of their plan. They want this one to go down under their command so they can not have it up. See, that stops 2 to 3 million amateur astronomers from warning the public when it does get within view. They'll be able to take close-up pictures of it. That's the difference between all these fake sightings that are either mirages, glitch, or anything. A real object, amateur astronomers will be able to zoom in and give you close-up pictures of it. Detail where you can recognize this is a different planet. Not something that looks real, but when you zoom in, you can't see it because a mirage you can't zoom in on. That's called a sundog. Just look it up in Wikipedia. They show some of the actual different types of sundog, but there's more than that even. And the rest is, if you take a picture through glass, you're going to have reflections from the sensors and everything else. These are common errors of people who are not familiar with the technology or the astronomy. That's why you don't see skilled astronomers who are still called amateur, but they're skilled astronomers, putting up real objects because it isn't there right now. You know?
Well, that's the most logical explanation, and I appreciate that realistic approach. And certainly, you know, the different things you put together for us tonight was awesome. The slideshow, the presentations, you put it together all very eloquently. And looking forward to talking to you again soon. So you have a fantastic evening, Gill. I appreciate it. And also, I just want to let our listeners know, check out his website, planet7x.net, planet7x.net. Also, there's a bunch of videos on YouTube. It's youtube.com/user/planet7x. So thank you very much, Gill. It was an honor to have you on our show tonight.
All right. Well, thank you, Rex, and it's a pleasure. Bye-bye.